Adam started with Lely in April of 2017, so he's been there just under 4 years now, and he provides support to a group of FMS or farm management support advisors within Lely dealers across the eastern U.S. In addition, also provides some training in T4C support across North America in conjunction with other colleagues. And today, I think he's here to talk to us specifically about T4C and some of the opportunities there. So prior to Lely, Adam used to work with the Holstein Association USA for over a decade, and then worked with Feed Commodities International for 2 years, which is a family-owned feed company there in the Northeast. Currently, he lives in Western Massachusetts with his wife Melissa, who is a fifth-generation dairy farmer, which is really awesome, and operates the Klessens River farm with her family. And they do have one Lely robot there that I'm sure you get to practice some on. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. And it looks like the stream is coming through great. So we'll take any questions through the chat as we proceed, and I'll relay those to Adam.
Great. Well, thanks, Ben. And just a quick sound check. You can still hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thanks, Dan, and thanks everybody for taking the time to come to this session to listen a little bit more about our system called T4C, our herd management software that works alongside with of our milking robot and feeding system called the Vector. I'm going to share my PowerPoint that we'll start with. And so we're going to focus a little bit today within the T4C system on the management by exception concept. So there's a lot of areas that we could go into within the herd management software itself. But within the time that we have today, I felt like it would be a good idea to focus on some of the areas that allow producers using the Lely robot system the ability to go in and address management protocols on individual animals rather than a whole group of animals or even the whole herd. So what we'll do are cover just a few topics here. So first we'll just take a brief minute or two to talk a little bit about some robot herd management concepts. And then we'll start talking about the data that we collect and how that helps us find those exceptions in the herd. We're gonna not spend a lot of time in PowerPoint. I would prefer to work more in the T4C demo environment so that we can actually take a look at some of the data as close to a real-time situation as possible. And then either at the end or through the presentation, Ben, you just tell me when we want to do some questions and answers as they pop up. So first, I think before we talk about anything data related or herd management related, also want to just take a second to understand why farms choose robots to begin with, right? Because until we can understand what the goals are of the farm, we can then take a deeper dive into how that farm wants to operate and manage the herd. And then we can start to look at how pieces of T4C are going to help them achieve those goals. So I think the first two are really, kind of the top reasons that you'll see farms really of any size choose a robotic milking system that improves social life. That prototypical, I want to be able to spend more time with my family, get off the farm for a little bit. I think that can be seen on any farm. The reduction of labor costs is another big one. And alongside with the reduction of labor costs could also be efficiency of costs, right? We can reallocate some of the labor that's on the farm, move it away from certain tasks like milking and put those resources to other aspects on the farm. The consistency in the milking process, the cows love that consistency, the same thing all the time when the robot milks them. A lot of farms have interest in new technology. There's those forward thinkers, the farms that want to have, that brand new piece of equipment coming off the line, either in the form of hardware or software. Improvement in the milk quality and udder health. you know, farms can really see some improvements there if you know, if that was a challenge for them in the older milking system. The frequency of milking and what that can do to production levels. And then last, and I think this is where we're going to spend a little bit of time here with our management by exception topic, is the efficiency in the cow touches, right? So how do we go around, how do we find the animals that need attention and leave the cows alone that do not need anything on any particular time of the day while we're in the pen. So that philosophy of let the cows be cows is kind of what we look for when we start to coach farms in how to develop protocols and routines around the cow touch. So in the robotic versus conventional milking system, and before I go any further, I certainly want to make the point here that I'm not saying that any one milking system is right or wrong. You know, I think at the end of the day, every farm manager, owner is going to look at what system works best for their operation, and they're going to you know, make those decisions based on a number of factors. But I think if we just break it down into the two main systems that we'll continue to find out there, or certainly the systems that are being invested in today, we have a herd concept where we're doing everything with the cows at the same time for the most part. You know, either we're moving all the cows to a milking parlor, either as a large group or the whole herd together. Versus the individual cow concept, which is you know, milking a cow one at a time, but gathering a lot of information on that one animal at that one milking visit. And then from a cow handling standpoint, you know, the information that we're gathering, the information that we're able to use, you know, in a conventional type setup, a lot of scenarios. Either in the form of you know, handheld devices with electronic IDs on the animals, but there's still a lot of whole herd handling going on, either in the form of, say, headlocks, you know, locking up a whole group of animals, and then working your way down that group of animals to identify the animals that need some level of attention, and then skipping over the animals that are not needed at that time. Versus that individual cow concept of taking an animal away from the rest of the herd when she's being milked, routing her to an animal handling area, something that's designed to hold animals for a very short amount of time, or something that could house animals for a portion of the day where they'll have access to feed and water until they get handled and then released back to the herd. So the information that we collect out of the system, either from the robot directly or from the external sensors like the collar that the animals wear in conjunction with the long distance readers that are now found in most of the robotic facilities, that's the information that makes the management by exception possible. When we collect, you know, upwards of 120 data elements every single day off of every single animal, there's a lot of information there. It can seem like data overload to a lot of farms that are first starting up, but I think the real beauty of a system like T4C is that we're gonna help the farmer interpret all that information. We're not going to expect any farm to sit down and look at all the data elements and all the animals and then try to make a decision on who needs to be treated, who needs a different milking schedule, who needs a different feed, a feed program. We're gonna isolate the animals based on certain conditions, based on the sensors that are triggering some kind of alarm, either good or bad. And then we're going to produce a list, a task for that farm to focus on. And what that's going to do is it's going to boil that herd down to just a very small group of animals that they need to focus attention on. And that allows the rest of the cows to go about their day as they normally would. You know, ruminating, laying down, milking, drinking, socializing, without the need for them being handled. So, what are some of the aspects of the day that can be managed by T4C information. So depending on what the topic is of the day, or which advisor's on the farm, could be the nutritionist, it could be veterinarian, it could be some other independent consultant on the farm. But we could be talking about feeding strategies, not only in the robot but also at the bunk. Lots of farms, depending on the size and the grouping strategies, may have one or multiple feed rations being fed out at the bunk. But then on the individual level, we have the robot feed. From a milk access standpoint, we talk about that frequency. What's going to allow a cow to milk at a certain time and others to not. And so, we work under the idea of, we want to milk the right cow at the right time. And so what does the cow, either at an individual or herd level, tell us about the milk settings? And then how can we make fair adjustments to ensure that the cows are being milked correctly? Routing. So when farms are equipped with routing, this is where we can really see the true advantages of a management by exception strategy. We can be more efficient with our cow chutches for anything from reproduction. So your breeding, pregnancy checks, any kind of hormone therapy program like OffSync, other health treatments, our dry off programs, hoof health, you name it. Anything that you may want to handle a cow for could be routed in the system. And then culling, and if we step away from all the normal reasons that come up for culling, if we start to boil it down from a robot performance standpoint, then we're starting to look at things like efficiency within the robot barn. So things like box time, teat position, milk quality, some of those type of things will start to come up and be managed more closely by T4C. So after this slide, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift screen, so it's going to take a second to transition. But I want to bring up our demo server for T4C, because I think it's going to be a lot easier for the viewers to kind of follow and track the movements of T4C and the flow of a user going through the system, and how they would interpret some of these reports, some of these lists, how they could take action on them, and then how some of the settings for, say, routing would work. So if you would bear with me for just a moment. And so in just a second, you should see the home screen for T4C. And I'm not sure, Ben, if you could just give me a audio cue that it's up.
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect, thank you. So this is the dashboard of T4C, and again, this is a demo server. So just some things may look a little off from a date standpoint, or because this is a backup from many months ago. But I think that you'll see as we move through, it's more about what's being shown or presented relative to the information, and how a producer would take next steps on certain actions. So just to kind of quickly cover what we're looking at initially. So a lot of farms, when a lot of farm managers or herds people, or any other employees on the farm that are interacting with T4C, when they first come to the computer, this is what they're going to see. And the management by exception starts right away, because when they're looking at these KPI dials, these key performance indicators, on anything from the daily milk production average per cow per day, or say the milkings per cow per day, or the refusals, fat and protein failures, all these KPI dials that are visible here. And I'm not going to go into every single one of these. It would just take too much time. But if I focused on something like milkings per cow per day, you can see that on this particular dial, the needle is pointing straight up, and you see two numbers, 2.8 outside of the parentheses and 2.8 inside the parentheses. In T4C, all the dials are interpreting data the exact same way. Of course, the values are different based on what the data element is. But if we were to look at milkings per cow per day and stay focused there, the 2.8 to the left of the parentheses, that's going to be your 24-hour number. So this is what the herd is averaging over the last 24 hours for milkings, which is nice to see. 2.8 is a good number in our particular systems. And then the number in the parentheses is the weekly average. Okay, so 2.8 is your last 7 days. And so what we're looking to do is identify what indicators within the robot system are staying relatively fair to their weekly average, or something going up. So there's an elevated value that is not good, or it could be that we do want to see an elevated value. Keep in mind, certain dials, it's better to see them to the left or down, right? So if we were to talk about something like failures per robot per day, you know, we want to see less failures. So in this case, the higher number is actually going up, and it's in red, alerting us that, you know, over the last day, we've seen more failures than we have over the last week. But coming back to the milkings per cow per day, any of these dials can be clicked on, and we can start to dive in. Okay, so now we can look at milkings by group. So we can see the milking heifers group and how they're doing from a 24-hour versus a week. The mature cows, their milkings, and then any other milking groups that could be present on the farm. If we wanted to go further, if we wanted to start looking beyond just herd group, and now we want to start looking at individual animals, we have some reports that will direct us in the area that most closely deals with the data at hand. So in this case, in the bottom left, I'm going to click on milking visit behavior report. And from here, I'm going to get a list of all the milking animals. And then I can start to sort data on whatever information I'm looking for. In this case, if I want to look at milkings, you can see there's that herd average, that 2.8. But if I sort it from low to high, I can start to look at any animals that are low on the milking schedule and try to get a sense of, are these animals that I would expect to see there, or are there some surprises, you know, based on their lactation days, milk production, you know, who's underperforming, who's not visiting. And then I can start to ask questions, why? Why is an animal that's, this particular animal here, 1506, she's 92 days in milk. So certainly, in a stage of lactation where we would expect her to be milking more than 1.7 times a day. She's a little over 61 pounds. We can take a closer look at her, click on her number, go right to her cow card. And now if I was the dairyman, I might already know something about this animal that's causing her to not be coming very often if she's been going through a recent health spell. But as a person that doesn't know anything about this herd, I'm just starting to use the information in front of me to try to understand what might be causing some of the limits to this animal's milkings. I could go to activity and take a look at her activity and see if there's something going on from a health standpoint. And looks like it might just take a second to load. This is all operating through a internet window. So if I look at her activity, I can say, well, things are looking pretty normal there from her movements. That she's not slowing down in activity. She's not doing any more resting versus moving around. I can look at things like her rumination on here, and I don't see any attentions that would throw me off there. The other thing I would consider is that this is a first lactation animal. Maybe her training was a bit challenged, that she just didn't get going right away. So the idea is that you can boil things right down to the individual cow and focus in on her, and try to come up with some conclusion as to what would be causing the problem. Like I said, I'm not the dairyman of this herd, so I can't speak to what would be going on with her specifically, but those would be some questions I would ask the dairyman when I look down a list like this and start to ask questions about, do you know what's going on with some of these cows, why they're not coming? And you may get responses like, yeah, there was a spell of mastitis, or she was lame for a little while that slowed her down a little bit. So we can click back and come back to our KPI. If I click back from there, I'll come back to the home screen, the dashboard. So again, any one of these dials you can click on and look for, a robot specific reason why something might be a variation from the weekly average, or a cow level scenario. At this point, what I want to do is focus on some of the reports that really help to define this management by exception concept here. And the first one that I've isolated and put onto a favorites report, so they'll be available on the dashboard as I open and close these reports. It's important to note all the reports within T4C are located under this analysis and reports tab on the left, but I've just pulled out some reports that I want to highlight today. The first one is going to be this health report. We call it number 10, health report. Any of these favorite reports that have animals on them, you can see a number in parentheses. That's going to be the number of animals that are on the report at this point in time. Now, the system's constantly refreshing itself. If you were to stay on the dashboard long enough, you would see the page go through a refresh. And that's really kind of showing the power of T4C in conjunction with the sensors that are out at the robot or out at the reader, collecting this data constantly. Is if animals are not on the say the heat report right now, or they're not on a collect cow report, or they're not on a health report, if this thing refreshes and an animal all of a sudden flags for a sensor that would put her on the report, she'll get updated and she'll now be on the report. Likewise, if an animal improves and she's no longer a health challenge, she might come off the report. So this point in time, there's 8 animals on this health report. And if I open it up, you can see that there's these 8 animals sorted by their sick chance. Okay, so sick chance is a value that's based on a score of 0 to 100. The higher the number, the more sick she is, the more more sensors that have gone off and caused her to come up on this report. So you can see with this particular animal, this 1385, she's on here because we've seen a very strong milk drop from yesterday to today. There's a time away, so she hasn't come to the robot in so many hours. She's also showing a possible mastitis in her right front, high conductivity in the right front, and her rumination is also dropping. So all these sensors going off, and with a severity for each sensor, is going to establish that sick chance. Now, this is a way that we can then direct the farmer to say, okay, this is an animal you should probably go find, either put her on a routing schedule. So if she does come back to the robot, she'll route directly into your animal handling area. If she's not coming, which is one of the symptoms of her sickness here, is her time away, this would at least give you the animal, the number that you should go find in the barn. And then, either take a look at her, get her up and get her to somewhere where you can take a closer look at her. If you look down the list a little bit, you see another couple animals here that are high on that sick chance report. But then there's a big drop, and the next one isn't until 20. And so the animals toward the bottom of the report are going to have 1 to 2 sensors that go off, but the severity is lower. It doesn't mean that there's not something going on with the animal, but it's certainly, they're animals you want to keep an eye on from the data standpoint, that if tomorrow some of these animals continue to go up, and depending on what they're challenged with, you may want to do more of a preventative therapy on them and try to stop that challenge before those animals becoming a 70 or an 80 or a 90 chance SIC score. So you'll find that dairymen and dairy women will scrutinize this report a little bit. It's kind of farm specific. Some may not look at any animals unless they're 70 or higher. It's just a matter of what they learn about their animals, what number is a good cutoff for them for either routing an animal or going and finding her in the pen. So that's our SIC report. Now, when you see these time aways, just bear in mind that because this is a demo server, this is not connected to any live system. So you might see some of these sensors going off for time away because at this point, there's no way for the system to refresh any milkings. The collect cow list, same idea. There's going to be some high time aways here because as of when this demo was loaded and refreshed with data, you're just going to see some high numbers. But what you would probably find is probably a more typical range of these, 17, 14, 13 hour type cows. Lots of reasons why animals could become a collect cow. But individual farms are going to interpret this list. They're going to make decisions based on the individual animal and the circumstance with that animal to decide whether or not they should go find her and put her into the fetch pen to get her milked. Things like daily production, the expected interval, expected yield, I should say, at that point, how fresh, how stale is that cow? Those are some of the things that are going to come into the producer's mind as to whether or not they should get her at this exact moment in time, if they're in their morning shift or if they're in their afternoon or evening shift. But every farm's going to use this to their best needs for time in the pen relative to the most urgent animals to get in. Our heat probability report. So taking in consideration the activity, the collar information that we're collecting in milk production, we're gonna highlight, identify animals that are potentially in heat. While we put this information in front of the producers along with an optimum insemination moment. So we'll even direct the producer as to when the optimum moment of the day is to breed the cow. If there's ever a question on the animal, is she really in heat? Is it a false heat? You can always click on one of the animals and it will take you right to her activity page. Give it a second here while the internet chugs away. And once we see the activity graph, we'll be able to understand, is this a real strong heat? Is it something where some activities in the barn got a cow stirred up, or was it another cow in heat that got this cow stirred up enough to trigger? If we look at the heat probability on this cow, which is these orangey, pinkish vertical bars, we can see that over here to the right, that's pretty strong, along with her blue activity line that goes up and off the chart. So chances are this cow is actually really in heat and should be inseminated. If we go back to the report, if the breeding is done, we can absolutely put the breeding in right from the report. So it makes it really efficient to come up here. You can see that the insemination option is already selected on the drop down, but on any of these reports, you can drop down and select an action to be executed. But if I select her and do an execute, I'll get the breeding interface screen up, and I'd be able to enter in that breeding. You can do it on a single animal. You can do it on multiple animals for batch entry. Go back home here. The last report I want to touch on here from identifying individual animals where the system is singling out animals for either myself or the farmer to take a look at and concentrate on are going to be some of the milk quality reports. So if I look at this udder health work list, I'm going to, as a dairyman, I'm going to want to know, okay, who are some of the animals that are currently challenged from a milk quality standpoint, and then what is the sensor, what's the trigger going on with them. So we can look across some of these animals and look for, is it a somatic cell indicator? Those will be in red if they have reached a certain threshold, which is set by the dairyman in the settings area of the program. Default is 500,000 on somatic cells, so you'll see that the ones that are over 500,000 are in red. But there could be something else going on. It could be that the somatic cells isn't the reason the animal's on the report, but that there's some other sensor within the MQC system that has detected something either off in color, abnormal from a conductivity standpoint, a color code. And so depending on what the severity is, how many times this animal has been on this report. So you can see the number to the far right, udder health attention counts. Is this animal a frequent flyer on this report, or is she new? We can then best plan our strategy for dealing with some of these animals, whether it's route them so we can take a closer look, do a cow side CMT test to confirm that the animal is in fact flagging for somatic cell and in which quarter, and then determine what the proper therapy is going to be at that point. Is it going to be a mastitis treatment, or is it going to be let the cow milk, separate her milk, but let her work through that with her own immune system? So we've taken a look at some of the reports that do a nice job of isolating individual animals and giving us the ability to ignore most of the herd from a day-to-day standpoint and really focus on those individuals. Now, if we start to think about how the system gives us the ability to handle these animals, get them away from the rest of the herd so that we can, either work with them on a very specific day of the week. If there's some foot management therapies involved, like foot bath, how can we manage that? And other reasons, like a vet check day. The vet comes every Tuesday, and we want certain cows isolated in that separation area for the vet to look at. And essentially anything that is going to be a cow touch, farms with the appropriate separation areas can really utilize those areas to handle most, if not all, of the cow touch scenarios that come up. So the first thing we can do is just take a look at what we have for some settings in here. Now, this is a demo from an actual robot farm. They're kind enough to let us use their information to keep this demo running for the outside world. So you may see some things that are not something that would be customary on certain farms, but for this particular farm, this is how they do it. But if we come to the routing tasks, you can see that there's some default routing scenarios that are built into the program. So we can have animals routed based on the number of times they failed. If it's just any failure, we can mark these active, interactive. Down below, we have our routing scheduler. So these are going to be more customized routing features that the farm wants to use specific to their scenario. So you can see here they have a fresh cow, probably up to 18 days. They want them routed into a certain area. My sense is, without having been to this farm before, but mostly just looking at their data, is that if they have a fresh cow area, either like a bedded pack or a small freestall section, those cows have the ability to come back to the robot. So they're setting up a fresh cow monitoring situation where they want to make sure those cows get off to the right start, that they're past any potential post-calving challenges. And then once once they've hit that 18 days or whatever time frame they want, those cows would then be out in the main herd. Any of these that are set up here, you can see that when the time is. So is it all day long? You can set certain times of the day. You can set certain days of the week. In this case, they're essentially doing it all day, every day. And then you can see the routing area. They have a straw bedded pack area. But the last one here is a footbath. You can see that area is a separate lane off of the robot. So in a lot of scenarios, you're going to see a sorting gate that's going to allow the cows to either go right back to the main herd, to the regular milking pen, a lane that might go strictly through a footbath, and then the third lane that would send them off to some animal handling separation area. So, you know, let's just open up this footbath one for example. So if we open up the routing task, we can edit it. We can change the location. We can change the trigger if it's going to always be a route for that group of animals. We can set it by a date. The real powerful tool in T4C that allows a lot of the flexibility in the routing is going to be these advanced filters. And so you can see that with an advanced filter set up specifically for footbath, and I'll show you the advanced filter in a moment, but by selecting this footbath advanced filter, we can then direct the attention down to a very specific group of animals that are going to use that footbath for that particular scenario. So what are the conditions for the animals that are going to go through this routing task? I can see that by opening this up. It's going to say they have to be in production. So it's a milking cow, and they've had a registered medicine. So they were trimmed within the last 7 days. So any animal that had any kind of hoof trim within the last 7 days, they're going to want them to go through the footbath after that trim. Or any animals that have had a wrap. So if somebody got foot wrapped, and I'm guessing that they would have pulled the wrap off, but treated within the last 7 days. All right. So if the foot wrap comes off, they want those animals to get treated through the footbath lane. You can see that there's one for heat. So animals that come into heat, they want them put into the straw pen, so that when the breeder or whomever is going to inseminate cows comes in, and the animals are all right where they need to be to get inseminated. Sick cows, same idea. Any animals that are challenged, they've come on that sick report. Which animals are going to be in the straw pen, ready for the person that's going to take a look at them and make a decision on what kind of treatment path is required for those animals. But the idea is that they're right there in that pen. It really reduces the amount of time that somebody's got to walk through the pen looking for these animals. So if we take a closer look at the advanced filters, you can see these are the different filters that are in place and being used. They can be used for either routing or for the reports. But let's take a look at the sick chance one because that's one of the routes that they have set up. So you can see the name of it is sick chance greater than 60. And so if I look at the conditions of the filter, very, very simple filter here. Essentially, if an animal is 60 or greater on the health report, they're going to get routed. Okay, so when we looked at that health report before, there were a few animals that were 2 in the 90s, 1 in the 80s, and then the rest were down closer to 20 or lower. So if with this routing in place, we're only going to be looking to have those animals that are on the higher end of that health report separated. I can confirm that by seeing that there's a number 3 right here. So it's already telling me how many animals are meeting this condition. And then I can quickly do a view report, and it should show me those 3 cows. All right. So I'll know that these are the 3 cows. If they were to come to the milking robot, they're going to be directed into the separation pen, so that when I come back to the barn in the afternoon If one or two of them have come, they should be in there. I'll be able to take a look at them. Now I may still have to go out and find that other one, that other third cow. Again, it depends on why they're not coming to the robot. You know, if particularly in a sick cow situation, they may not be wanting to come to the robot. So, you know, it's not going to be 100% that all cows are going to be in there for you. But depending on the type of routing that you're looking at, in many cases, a lot of the animals will be in there. Animals that are due for dry off, animals that are due for some, you know, health treatment plan, off-sync schedules, those kind of things. So animals that are healthy and coming to the robot on a regular schedule, they'll typically be the ones that are in there ready for you whenever the necessary task comes up. Let's see, the fresh cow sort. So we can see here that there was that fresh cow sort that they had for 18 days. So you can see that there's 6 cows right now that get routed to the straw pen because they're 0 to 18 days in milk. So a pretty simple filter there. Now, how can you build a filter? How many different elements can you use to define a filter for either a customized report or for custom routing? You can just get a sense of going down this list here, all the scenarios that you can use to build these step-by-step filter sets that are going to really, you know, take that group or herd level down to the individual animal, and really direct your attention to, in this case, just 6 animals out of 130 something cows. Let me go back home. A couple other analysis tools that are available in the program that I wanted to highlight today, just from a overall herd level, and just trying to get a sense of how the herd is doing overall today. This is a nice scatter plot graph that we have that takes a look at all of the cows currently in milk. You have days in milk on the bottom, day production on the left. And so what you're looking for are, how are the groups of animals doing? How are my fresh cows doing as a group? How are my mid to late lactation cows doing? Do I have any outliers when I just take a real quick glance at a report like this? In this case, the animal that would draw my attention and I'd go, what's going on with her? She's really lagging behind everybody else at the same stage of lactation. Well, if I hover over her, I can get a little pop-up, tells me who she is. I know, just based on having looked at some of the reports, this is one of the cows on the sick report, right? You can click on this and go to the cow card, but I already know who she is. She's this 1385. If I close out of here, go to the health report, she's that really sick cow. So my attention is now focused as a herd manager, either myself or I can direct some other employee. We need to get some therapy to this cow. Okay, I don't need to go and look at 50 other animals to find this one. I can just direct whomever right to her. Another report that will be handy for the farm as well as advisors to just kind of get a sense of overall how the herd is doing. And again, starting at that herd level or the group level is the lactation analysis graph. So while not necessarily being able to click on this and pull up any individual cow, what I'm able to do is look for trends at certain stages of lactation and try to get a sense of how individual animals are doing and how that impacts the averages. And so, if I were to look at, say, fresh cows, I can see that, well, between 0 and the first 3 weeks of lactation, while I do have some pretty strong production as the cows reach up to their peak around 50 days or so, there may be some opportunities to make that a little better based on the way we're feeding the cows. Do we see any, either from the data or from what the herd tells us about how they're they're seeing any cows on the sick report, or if they're seeing any kind of ketosis or other metabolic challenges with the animals. This will direct our attention to some management ideas or decisions that could come up that would help get cows off to a little bit of a better start. But we can look for opportunities for these different groups of animals at different stages of lactations. We can filter off a certain group. Like right now, this report is only looking at mature cows, but we can throw first lactation animals back into it and see how having heifers thrown in throw the numbers off in taking a look at the whole herd. May not be the best way to look at it, particularly if the heifers are being fed differently, either in the robot feed or from a bunk feed. But you can quickly go through and just deselect any of the groups that you don't want to look at in a report like this. So all these reports, either in graph form or list form, are really designed with the idea that we're going to help the dairy identify who the animals that need support are, or who the good cows are, who are the cows that we want to ensure that we're making the right decisions on, so that we can make sure they reach their highest potential. The last thing we want to do is put up barriers to keep our best cows from becoming better cows. So where can we look at opportunities to raise the ceiling for those cows? Whether it's breeding decisions or culling decisions, we need to have this information to really understand what direction we want to go to with cow selection, bull selection. And I think the information in T4C really helps the robot farmers do that. So based on the information I wanted to present and the time we had, I wanted to ensure that there was about 10 to 15 minutes left at the end for questions and answers. So Ben, at this point, I've completed the review of T4C as far as I wanted to go, unless there were specific questions that would take me back to a particular section.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It's been a while since I've navigated through one of these, and it seems like not only is there a lot more information, but I probably did not know how to capitalize on everything before as well. So I've been keeping an eye out for questions in the chat, and if there's any yet to come, I would encourage people to type those in. But so far, our group has been a little bashful. The good news is I've kept a bunch myself.
Good,
And
Ben.
at least we'll get started with those, and then give people the opportunity if possible. And I was wondering, just if possible, right off the bat, can you talk a little bit about this dry matter intake, those two dials on there? Because I know some of that's getting delivered through the robot probably, and then is the rest of that dependent on whether or not you're utilizing a robotic feeder, or how else would you track that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ben. So I should have prefaced the demo herd and said that this is a farm that also uses the MFR system, so the mixing feeding robot, our vector. When either the vector is used as a standalone robot on the farm or in conjunction with the milking robots, it utilizes more reports and KPIs than if you were using just the milking system. So any of the feed efficiency, dry matter intake dials that you're seeing there, those would be related to the information that the vector is feeding out from a feed number standpoint. It would take into consideration the robot feed as well, because with a vector, your total ration, so everything that the cow is consuming, either at the feed bunk or in the robot, is being entered into T4C, along with dry matter percents on all the feed stuffs. So it can get pretty accurate from the standpoint of how much feed the animals are consuming. Without a vector, if it was strictly the robot feed, these dials wouldn't be showing.
Yeah, thanks. As a nutritionist, of course, I hone in immediately on the input in that data.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's always really interested me with the robots is the opportunity to try and dial in how much they consume per cow based on milk production data, component data, as well as body weight, if you've got the scale. And so I guess I was curious, I can't remember which report where you were able to see the concentrate per 100 pounds of milk. And I assume that's all coming through the robot. Is that
Yeah, yeah. When you're looking, when you're thinking about concentrate per 100 pounds of milk, at least when you're strictly feeding with a robot, in no MFR, that information is going to be purely based on the amount of grain being fed to the animals through the robot. So there is a dial for it, so you can see in this particular herd, their current concentrate is 11.5 pounds per 100 pounds of milk. There's a couple different reports that would show some variations in how the animals are being fed. There's one here, this 53. Let me just make sure it's set right. This will show on a day-to-day basis the daily averages, not just for feeding, but for all the performance information, right? So milk production from day to day, fat and protein, the number of milkings, refusals. But this line here, this maroon line, kind of towards the top, would tell you how much average feed per day each animal is getting. In this case, it's about 9.5 pounds per day per cow. Where the system individualizes that. So that's just a herd average. And again, you have your concentrate per 100 pounds of milk that is calculated out to 11 and a half. The individual aspect of feeding comes into play when you look at what we call our feed tables. So under the feeding tab, I'll just open up this particular feed table here. It's for heifers, milking heifers. You can see the feed levels, and excuse the decimals here. That's not very typical, but this is a Canadian herd that would have been inputted in kilograms, and then it's been converted back to imperial. So you'll see some decimals that wouldn't typically show here, but you'll see a pretty standard two-step feed table here, where initially we feed all the cows the same. When an animal first comes into lactation, the robot doesn't have any milking information on that animal as of yet. It's going to take a good week to 2 weeks to get a good baseline for the animals as they bump up the production ladder. So we feed them all on a very linear path to start. Let them establish what their production levels are going to be heading into their first couple to 3 weeks of lactation. In this particular herd, they use a 3-week startup period, but after 3 weeks, you can see the 21 days here, 21 days after calving, the system starts to look at them on an individual basis, and it looks at the milk production, and then it corresponds to a very specific feed level. From there, you have different production steps, the 77 to 88 to 218, and then you can see some corresponding feed levels. Just keep in mind that in between each step, there is a corresponding grain level to production level. So there's no need to put in, a production level of every 5 pounds of milk or every 10 pounds. It's more or less about how much grain, what grain relative to production you want at your lower producing animals versus your higher producing animals, and what that what that feeding rate's going to be. So you want to take care of your higher producing animals, not shortchange lower producing animals, but you certainly don't want to overfeed them as well. They've got a 90-day stage as well, where they reevaluate, and they have actually a lower production level with a lower amount of grain. So they're looking at it and saying, after 90 days, if certain cows haven't reached a certain level of production, we're not gonna keep overfeeding them grain, and we're gonna start treating them a little more restrictive, and then they look at it from a late lactation standpoint and say, okay, now we're really far out in lactation. Now we're really going to be a little bit more restrictive on those lower producing tail enders. So there's a lot of flexibility in these feed tables, a lot of different feeding strategies you'll see. I think the real success comes from when you can feed based on the production. Right. So if we can get to a scenario where now we're letting each cow express themselves and feed to that natural genetic potential, then we can remove, like I mentioned earlier, we can remove some of those obstacles. We can break that ceiling for the best cows in the herd. It's very common for settings in here, or even the milking settings, where we're putting up barriers and obstacles that the cows have to jump over to try to get to that next level. That would be a little touch on the feeding, and I haven't gone into it, but I can if you'd like, but the milking side.
No, that's good. Thanks. We have a question from the chat from Paula, who is curious how the robot actually measures or counts the SCC.
Sure, that's a good question. That's something that comes up quite a bit. There's I think a lot of misconception out in the field about how the MQCC2 unit works, and I think that we find a lot of comparisons being made between, say, herds that still DHIA test and trying to compare sample to sample and say, well, this one's higher than that one, or vice versa. The robot's higher than the actual milk sample. So with the somatic cell counter within the robot, it's, for lack of a better term, it's essentially a CMT test. It's a little bit more sophisticated than just the paddle method. But what we're doing is we're taking a pre-mixed reagent solution that the farmer mixes and puts into the robot. When the milk pump is pumping the milk away from the milking jar, it's taking a sample of milk, multiple samples of milk from the jar, and it's mixing it with the reagent, and it's looking for the reaction, so the consistency of the reaction, and using a sensor to measure that reaction. It establishes a range of what the somatic cells would be for that particular milking. Let me just pull up real quick an animal here. And I believe this herd has somatic cell counters, so let's see if we can just find an animal here. So there's a couple things that go along with, I'll click on milk quality here. There's a couple of different things that go along with the actual sample itself that will cause it to be a little bit different than a DHIA or even a lab, your co-op lab that replies back on your bulk tank sample. So the reagent that the milking robot uses is looking at it's reacting with live cells within the milk. The equipment used in, say, DHI labs, or even at the labs with the hauler or the co-op, are a little bit more sensitive. Of course, they're quite a bit more expensive and a bit more dialed into the accuracy of the cells. They're looking at all somatic cells in the milk. So what you will typically find is a scenario where T4C tends to be a little bit lower in its count than, say, an actual lab sample. Now, the discrepancy can be anywhere from 30, 40,000 to 50, 60, or even higher. But I would make the point that when we look at it from a T4C standpoint, from a robot standpoint, it's a management tool. It's one of many tools on the robot's tool belt that we can use to make decisions and identify animals that need attention. If an animal's high in T4C, chances are she's high with DHIA, or she's the one that's causing a high load in the bulk tank. If an animal tests, say, 800,000 in the robot, and you send an individual cow sample off to a lab, and it comes back at 950 or 1 million, I don't think that's going to alter the way that you make your your treatment or management decisions around that cow, right? A high cow is a high cow. On the reverse side of that, you see a cow here that's, consistently under 100,000, 50s, 80s, 49. If you took her milk and sent it off to a lab, if she came back at a 90,000 or even 100,000, chances are you're not going to do anything different, right? She's a low cow. She's a healthy cow. But yeah, the reaction is with a reagent milk sample. The robot takes a few samples at one time and then averages it out, which is what's presented in the actual number that's provided for that milking. Now, some will ask why is every milking not showing a somatic cell score? There's a setting in T4C that allows the producer to collect a sample at every milking or every third milking. And under that smart sampling or every third milking, that allows the producer to save just a little bit on the reagent use and the costs associated with that solution. What ends up happening is if a cow has a high count with one of the samples that are collected, the system will then actually start to sample every milking after that until that high attention comes down. So in a case like this, you probably don't need a sample every single milking. She's consistently in that range of 50 to 80 something thousand. But if for one milking she happens to have a flare up or gets infected and all of a sudden shows 550,000, you would see it. It would be red. And from that point on, it's going to take a sample every milking so that you can stay on top of what's going on with that cow.
Excellent, thanks. There's still time for one more question if somebody's got one in the chat. So I guess I was just curious, it seems like there's a plethora of data here, right? It's pretty easy to get lost in the data. So when you first get started using this system, maybe what are the first couple things you want to try and get in the habit of always checking?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ben. So part of our role in the FMS area of Lely, not just on the North American level, but with the Lely centers that we work so closely with, is startup support, right? So a herd's coming into this. Some may have some background with some herd management software experience. They've been using another program. So they may acclimate a little easier to the system than, say, a herd that's done very little with the software in the past. But at any rate, for everybody that moves into a system like this, it's data overload. It's going to be easy to get consumed by all the information, all these dials that are flashing in front of your face. So we really, through coaching, we really encourage farms to spend their time, particularly in the first couple of weeks, really just focusing on getting cows to the robot, getting them milked, and getting that training out of the way, so that the system can really start to get baselines on the cows. A lot of this data is not going to be very useful for the first week or so, because the system doesn't have much of a baseline anyways on the cows. All right, and so there's no need to really focus on everything all at once. Where we want people to focus attention very early on in the startups week is that health report, right? Start to look for animals that are having some challenges either from rumination or activity. Hopefully some of those aren't coming up, because if we're actively getting cows up to get them milked during that first week, we'll notice anyways through our visual interactions with the cows that some cows aren't looking very good, like the transition is a little more stressful for them versus other cows. The collect cow list, as soon as we start to pull gates away, right? So we're getting out of that training mode where we're actively getting cows into the robot every 6 to 8 hours using gates. As soon as we start to pull those away and let cows start to feel their own way to the robot based on their training, the collect cow report's really going to help us identify the cows that we need to start going after versus getting everybody up and getting everybody to the robot, right? The cows that take onto the robot very quickly, we want to continue to allow them to behave that way. We don't want to start disrupting their own patterns. The udder health work list, we want to know early on, all right, do we have any cows that are showing signs of stress in the udder from the transition, and what do we need to do with them, early on to mitigate some of those early stressors. Failed milkings, this is one that I didn't highlight initially, but it's certainly one that you want to keep an eye on really early on in your transition. Failed milkings is really going to help identify the cows that have some either physical challenge with the robot, so it's an udder conformation or teat placement challenge, or it's a behavior, right? So they're not adjusting well. They get into the robot and they kick, they dance, they move, and so trying to get a sense of who the cows are that need additional support in the robot, whether that means that somebody's got to be there when they milk. So there's ways to put cows under supervision or isolate their milking times to when somebody's around the barn. But we really want to understand why cows are failing and what we can do about it. So it's some of these task-based reports that are really where we want to keep farms focused early on, because if they start going into all the other reports that we have, and I'll just pull up the reports page here, but it's going to be easy for producers to want to just start clicking and looking at all these things and say, oh, this one sounds interesting. Milkings an hour, what does that mean? If they just start clicking around and opening things, they're just gonna put themselves in kind of that data quicksand where they're just looking at all this stuff and they're not able to really make sense of it yet, and their attention is being drawn away from the things that they really should be looking at. So I think part of that FMS role, which is just so important to, particularly during that startup and that first few weeks, is to really keep the farms focused. And then as time allows, 3, 4, 5 weeks in, start to expose them to some of the other data elements that are in there and really start to sharpen, some of these settings that were in place for startup. Maybe we start to go to some different milk settings, some different feed settings. We want to work with the advisors to all be on the same page about what changes are going to be made, after that first month or two. But that becomes just an ongoing, analysis of the herd and looking for opportunities.